Joe Barnes wiped sweat from his forehead as he knelt beside a small stream in the Amazon rainforest. The jungle hummed with life around him. Birds called from the canopy, insects buzzed near his ears, and somewhere in the distance, a monkey howled. Joe filled his canteen with the cool, clear water and took a long drink. After 5 days alone in the jungle, Joe felt at home. At 32, the former Navy SEAL had traded military life for a quieter one as a wilderness survival instructor. This solo expedition was both vacation and practice for him. He planned to bring students here next month, and he needed to scout the best routes. Joe stood up and looked at the late afternoon sun filtering through the leaves. He had about 2 hours of daylight left, enough time to set up camp and prepare dinner. As he shouldered his pack, something caught his eye. A slight shimmer in the air, like heat rising from hot pavement. But this was different. It moved against the wind. Joe froze. His instincts, honed by years of military training, told him he wasn't alone. He casually reached for the knife at his belt while scanning the jungle. There it was again, a faint distortion about 30 feet up in the canopy, moving between branches. Interesting, Joe whispered to himself. He had never seen anything like it before. It wasn't an animal, and it certainly wasn't human. The shape seemed to bend the light around it, creating an almost invisible outline. Joe pretended not to notice and continued walking, but he chose his path carefully, keeping track of the strange presence following him. After 20 minutes, he reached a small clearing and decided to make camp. As he gathered wood for a fire, he counted 3 more of the strange distortions moving through the trees around him. Night fell quickly in the jungle. Joe sat beside his small fire, cooking a simple meal of rice and dried fish. The strange visitors remained, watching him from the darkness. Joe could feel their eyes on him. He ate slowly, then pulled out a small notebook and began to write by firelight. Suddenly, the air in front of him rippled like water. Joe didn't flinch. He calmly closed his notebook and waited. The ripple grew larger, and then a figure appeared, as if stepping through an invisible door. The being stood nearly 7 feet tall with blue-tinted skin that seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. Its 4-fingered hands ended in short claws, and its large eyes reflected the flames like mirrors. It wore what looked like armor made of a material Joe had never seen before. "You can see us," the creature said. Its voice sounded like several people speaking at once, deep and musical. Joe nodded. "I've been watching you watch me for the past few hours." The alien tilted its head, clearly surprised. "Impossible. Our cloaking technology is perfect." Joe pointed to the trees where he had spotted the distortions. "Nothing's perfect in the jungle. The way you move disturbs the air. It catches the light differently." More ripples appeared around the clearing, and 5 more aliens revealed themselves. They spoke to each other in a language of clicks and whistles. Joe remained seated, his posture relaxed but ready. The first alien stepped forward. "I am Commander Vexlor of the Zordaxian Confederation. We have been observing your planet for some time." "Joe Barnes," he replied simply. "Mind telling me why you're following me?" Vexlor made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We did not expect to be detected. No other species has noticed us during initial observation." One of the other aliens, shorter and with darker skin, spoke harshly. "It must be luck. Humans are primitive compared to us." Joe smiled slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just not as stealthy as you think." Vexlor raised a hand to silence his companion. "This is interesting. Very interesting. Joe Barnes, your species is being evaluated for potential membership in our galactic community. One of our tests involves stealth capabilities." "And how are we doing?" Joe asked. "Until now, we believe humans relied too heavily on technology and lacked natural stealth abilities," Vexlor said. "But you have shown us something unexpected. Perhaps we have more to learn about your kind." The jungle grew quiet, as if even the animals were listening. Joe looked at the strange visitors from another world and realized that his simple camping trip had just become much more complicated. "I think," said Joe, We have a lot to talk about. Joe added more wood to the fire as the aliens settled around it. Their blue skin glowed oddly in the firelight. The shorter alien who had called humans primitive stood apart from the others, watching Joe with narrow eyes. "Let me understand this," Joe said. "You're testing all species for membership in some kind of space club." Vexilor nodded. His movements were smooth and precise. "The Galactic Federation requires all member species to pass 3 tests: intelligence, innovation, and stealth. Your people have already shown remarkable progress in the first 2 areas. We have observed your internet, your machines, your cities," another alien added. This one had 4 arms and a face covered with what looked like extra nostrils. Very impressive for such a young species. Joe poked at the fire with a stick. "And the stealth test, what does that involve?" Vexilor exchanged glances with his team. "Usually, we evaluate how well a species can evade detection using their natural abilities and technology. Humans present a puzzle. Your technology is noisy and easy to track, but individuals like you," he gestured at Joe, "you show potential we did not expect." The short, hostile alien stepped forward. "I am Sub-Commander Riltic. I believe your detection of us was mere luck. Humans lack the natural abilities that make true stealth possible." Joe smiled slightly. "Is that so?" Riltic continued. "Our species evolved with natural camouflage. The listeners can hear a heartbeat from a mile away. The gazers can see heat signatures through solid walls. What special abilities do humans possess?" "Adaptation," Joe said simply. "We learn. We watch. We adjust." Vexilor seemed intrigued. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order." "A challenge." Joe leaned forward. "What kind of challenge?" "A test of stealth," Vexilor explained. "If you can evade our tracking team for 48 Earth hours within this jungle region, humans will pass the stealth evaluation." Riltic made a harsh clicking sound. "This is unnecessary. One human can it." "I accept," Joe interrupted. The aliens fell silent. Vexilor studied Joe carefully. "You understand what this means. We will use our full tracking capabilities. You will have only what you carry now." Joe looked around at his simple camp. He had his knife, a canteen, some basic supplies, and the clothes on his back. Not much, but in the jungle, it might be enough. "There is more at stake than you realize," Vexilor continued. "The evaluation of your entire species rests on this test." "No pressure, then," Joe said with a small smile. Riltic stepped closer. "You will also carry this." He held out a small silver device the size of a coin. "An emergency beacon. If you face danger or wish to surrender, press it, and we will come immediately." Joe took the device and slipped it into his pocket. "And if I win, what happens to Earth?" "Your species will be formally invited to join the Galactic Federation," Vexilor said. "Access to new technologies, protection from hostile forces, and trade with 1,000 worlds." "And if I lose?" The aliens were quiet for a moment. Finally, Vexilor spoke. "Earth will be classified as a developing world. We will check back in 500 years to see if you have advanced further." Joe stood up and stretched. The jungle around them had grown dark, with only the fire providing light. He could hear night creatures beginning their songs. "When do we start?" he asked. "At dawn," Vexilor replied. "You will have a 30-minute head start. Then my team will begin tracking you." Riltic moved closer to the fire. "Do not think this will be easy, human. I have never failed to find my target." Joe nodded. "There's a first time for everything." The aliens withdrew to their ship for the night, leaving Joe alone by his fire. He didn't sleep much. Instead, he planned. He thought about the jungle around him, about what he had observed of the aliens, about their strengths and weaknesses. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Joe was ready. He put out his fire, gathered his few belongings, and waited for the signal to begin. Vexlor appeared at the edge of the clearing. "Your time starts now, Joe Barnes. Good luck." Joe nodded once, then turned and walked into the jungle. Within seconds, the dense foliage swallowed him completely. The challenge had begun. Joe moved quickly through the jungle as sunlight began to filter through the leaves. He had 30 minutes before the aliens would start hunting him. Every second counted. His mind raced back to his training days. His instructor, an old Navy SEAL named Frank, had drilled 3 rules into him. Know your environment, know your enemy, and use both to your advantage. Joe already knew the jungle. He had spent weeks here and understood its sounds, its patterns, and its secrets. Now he needed to understand his hunters. He remembered how the aliens had moved last night. They were clearly uncomfortable in the humid jungle. Their breathing seemed labored, and they stayed close to each other. Most importantly, they relied heavily on their technology. Joe stopped at a small stream and knelt down. He scooped up handfuls of dark mud from the bottom and began spreading it over his exposed skin. The mud would mask his heat signature and cover his scent. As he worked, memories of his childhood flooded back. His father, a park ranger in Montana, had taught him to track and to hide. "The best hunter understands what it's like to be the prey," his father had said. Joe smiled at the memory. He never thought those wilderness lessons would prepare him for alien hunters. Joe covered his face, arms, and neck with mud. Then he gathered large leaves and tucked them into his clothes, breaking up his human outline. He took off his bright blue shirt and buried it under a rock. The dark green t-shirt underneath would blend better with the foliage. 20 minutes had passed. Joe moved to the stream and stepped into the water. Walking in the stream would hide his footprints and wash away his scent. He moved downstream for several hundred yards, careful to avoid disturbing the water too much. When he reached a fallen tree crossing the stream, Joe pulled himself up and balanced on the trunk. He crossed to the other side of the stream without leaving prints in the mud. Then he found a patch of hard ground and continued his journey. 5 minutes left. Joe needed to put as much distance as possible between himself and the starting point. But he also needed to be smart. The aliens would expect him to run straight ahead, putting maximum distance between them. Instead, Joe circled back, moving carefully through the thick vegetation. He found a tall tree with dense foliage and began to climb. From a high vantage point, he might be able to observe his hunters without being seen. As he settled among the branches, Joe heard a high-pitched hum in the distance. The aliens were starting their hunt. He controlled his breathing, making it slow and quiet. Then he waited. Soon, he saw them entering the clearing he had left 30 minutes ago. Riltik led the group, holding a device that looked like a tablet. 3 other aliens followed, each different from the others. One had huge eyes that moved independently like a chameleon. Another had those extra nostrils covering its face. The third had enormous ear-like structures that turned constantly, like satellite dishes seeking a signal. The aliens spread out, examining the ground where Joe had been. The one with the extra nostrils knelt and touched the dirt, then made clicking sounds to the others. They seemed confused. Riltik pointed at the stream, and the group moved toward it. The alien with large ears tilted its head, listening intently. The one with many eyes scanned the trees and undergrowth. They were looking for signs of Joe's passage. Joe remained perfectly still. Even when a large insect landed on his mud-covered arm, he didn't flinch. He watched as the aliens followed the stream in the direction he had initially gone. Their confidence was obvious even from a distance. They believed their technology and natural abilities would make tracking the human easy. Joe allowed himself a small smile. The hunt had just begun, and the aliens were already heading in the wrong direction. He would wait until they were out of sight, then move to a new location. For the next 48 hours, the jungle would be both his hiding place and his ally. From his perch in the tree, Joe watched as the alien hunters disappeared into the forest, completely unaware that their prey was watching them. 2 hours had passed since the hunt began. Joe had moved twice, each time climbing high into the canopy to observe the alien team before planning his next move. The jungle had grown hotter as the sun rose higher, and sweat caused the mud on his skin to streak. From his current position, Joe watched Riltic gather his team in a small clearing below. The alien commander seemed angry, waving his arms and pointing at the tracking devices that had failed to locate their human prey. Impossible. Riltic's voice carried up to Joe's hiding place. He is just one primitive human. Our scanners should have found him within minutes. The alien with the massive ears, Joe had decided to call him Listener, turned slowly in a circle, his ear structures twitching. Joe held his breath and remained perfectly still. I detect many heartbeats, Listener said, but the jungle is full of life. I cannot isolate the humans. The one with many eyes, Gazer, scanned the trees. The thermal readings are confused by the heat of the day. Everything is warm now. Joe smiled slightly. The jungle was helping him. Its riot of life, sounds, and heat signatures was overwhelming the alien's special senses. Riltic turned to the fourth alien, the one with extra nostrils. Sniffer, can you not track his scent? Sniffer made a frustrated gesture. The human went into water. Then the trail vanishes, and there are too many smells here. Plants, animals, decay. It clouds my senses. Riltic tapped angrily at his device. We will deploy the drones. The human cannot hide from aerial surveillance. Joe watched as Riltic removed 6 small objects from a pack. Each was about the size of a baseball, but perfectly round and metallic. Riltic tapped his device again, and the spheres rose into the air, hovering silently. Search pattern Alpha, Riltic commanded. Find the human. The spheres spread out, moving slowly through the jungle. One drifted in Joe's direction. He pressed himself against the trunk of the tree, using the broad leaves as cover. The drone passed within 10 feet of his position, but continued on without pausing. Joe's heart pounded, but he controlled his breathing. He needed to move. The drones would eventually search the entire area, and staying in one place was too risky. Below, Riltic and his team began to follow one of the drones, moving deeper into the jungle. Joe waited until they were out of sight, then carefully descended from his perch. On the ground, Joe knelt and listened. The drone hum was faint but still audible. He needed to put distance between himself and the machines, but he also needed to remain undetected. A plan began to form in his mind. Joe moved quietly toward a section of jungle where he had seen a group of howler monkeys earlier. The animals were noisy and produced strong heat signatures, perfect for confusing alien technology. As he approached the monkey troop, Joe picked up a few small stones. He circled around until he was positioned opposite from the direction he planned to travel. Then he threw the stones into the brush near the monkeys. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The howler monkeys erupted in alarm calls, swinging through the trees and creating chaos. Other jungle animals joined the commotion, birds taking flight and small mammals scurrying for cover. In the midst of this natural distraction, Joe moved quickly in his chosen direction. He stayed low, using fallen logs and dense undergrowth for cover. The sound of the monkeys faded behind him, but ahead he could hear the hum of another drone. Joe froze as the metallic sphere drifted into view. It hovered 20 feet away, slowly rotating as its sensors scanned the area. Joe sank deeper into the ferns where he was hiding, barely breathing. The drone suddenly emitted a series of beeps and changed direction, moving toward the monkey disturbance. Joe allowed himself to relax slightly. The alien's technology was being drawn to the larger heat signatures and sounds of the disturbed animals. When the drone was gone, Joe continued his careful movement through the jungle. 6 hours had passed since the challenge began. He had 42 more to go, and the aliens were growing frustrated. Riltic's confidence was cracking. Joe smiled as he slipped silently between the trees. The aliens had failed to understand a fundamental truth. Sometimes the best technology was no technology at all. 12 hours into the challenge, the jungle fell into darkness. Night creatures awoke, filling the air with chirps, croaks, and distant howls. Joe sat with his back against a massive tree trunk, allowing himself a brief rest. He had found a small cave formed by the tree's enormous roots and covered the entrance with leaves and branches. He took a careful sip from his canteen. Water wasn't a problem in the jungle, but he needed to conserve energy. The aliens had been searching nonstop, their frustration growing with each passing hour. From his hiding place, Joe could see faint lights moving through the trees as the alien team used illumination to continue their search in the darkness. Their lights gave away their positions, making them easy to avoid. Joe smiled as he remembered Riltik's angry voice earlier that day. "The scanner is malfunctioning. This humidity is affecting our equipment." The aliens were learning a hard lesson. Technology wasn't always the answer. Their devices struggled in the jungle's moisture, heat, and dense vegetation. Meanwhile, Joe relied on skills humans had used for thousands of years. A soft beeping sound suddenly cut through the night. Joe tensed. One of the drones was approaching his hiding spot. He pulled deeper into the cave of roots and remained perfectly still. The metal sphere hovered just outside his shelter, its sensors scanning the area. Joe could see the glow of its lights through the leaves he had used as cover. His heart pounded, but he controlled his breathing. The drone lingered for what seemed like an eternity before finally moving on. Joe waited 10 more minutes before carefully emerging from his hiding place. He needed to keep moving. The aliens would eventually search every inch of this area. In the darkness, Joe relied more on touch and hearing than sight. He moved slowly, feeling his way through the jungle. The mud on his skin had dried and begun to flake off. He needed to renew his camouflage. Joe found a small stream and once again covered himself with mud. As he worked, he heard voices approaching. The alien team was nearby. "The human must rest sometime," Gazer said. "No species can maintain constant movement." "This one is different," Listener replied. "He moves like a shadow." Riltik made an angry sound. "Nonsense. He is hiding, and we will find him. Spread out and search every hollow, every tree." Joe sank into the stream, submerging himself until only his nose and eyes remained above water. The cold mud at the bottom helped mask his heat signature. He watched through reeds as the alien team searched the area, their lights sweeping back and forth. Sniffer approached the stream, his extra nostrils flaring. "Water again. The human knows we cannot track him through water." Riltik joined Sniffer at the edge of the stream. "He cannot stay in water forever. Search both banks. Find where he exits." The aliens split up, moving in opposite directions along the stream. Joe remained submerged, the cool water numbing his skin. He would wait until they were gone before moving. An hour passed. The aliens had moved far enough away that Joe could no longer see their lights. Slowly, he emerged from the water, his body stiff from the cold. He needed to find a place to warm up. Joe moved deeper into the jungle, away from the stream. He found a fallen log and checked it carefully for dangerous creatures before crawling inside. The hollow log would provide some warmth and concealment. Inside, Joe allowed himself to think about the bigger picture. The aliens were testing humanity's readiness to join some kind of galactic community. His performance would determine Earth's fate. The pressure was enormous, but Joe found himself enjoying the challenge. Half the test period had passed, and the aliens had yet to come close to capturing him. Their technology was failing, and their confidence was crumbling. Meanwhile, Joe was learning more about them with each encounter. As he rested in the log, Joe began planning his next move. The aliens expected him to keep running. Instead, he would do something they would never anticipate. He would start hunting them. Dawn broke over the jungle, marking the start of the second day. Joe had slept in short bursts through the night, always alert for approaching aliens. Now he was ready to change his strategy. After warming up with silent stretches, Joe moved out from his hollow log shelter. The morning air was thick with mist, providing perfect cover. He had decided to follow the aliens instead of running from them. By observing them closely, he could learn their patterns and predict their movements. Joe moved carefully through the undergrowth, following the sound of alien voices. Soon, he spotted them in a small clearing. The team looked tired. Their once clean uniforms were stained with mud and plant matter. Even alien technology was no match for the jungle's relentless assault. Riltik paced back and forth, tapping angrily at his device. 24 hours and nothing. This is humiliating. Commander Vexlor's voice came through the device. Your frustration is understandable, but remember the purpose of this test. We are learning about human capabilities. What we are learning, Riltik replied, is that our equipment is failing. The human is not special. Our technology is simply malfunctioning in this primitive environment. Joe smiled at this. The aliens couldn't accept that their advanced technology had limits. They couldn't believe that a primitive human could outmaneuver them through skill alone. An idea formed in Joe's mind. If the aliens relied so heavily on their technology, what would happen if that technology began to disappear? Moving silently, Joe circled around the clearing until he was behind a fallen tree on the opposite side from the alien team. He picked up a rock and threw it far to his right. The sound of it crashing through branches caught the alien's attention. There, Gazer pointed toward the noise. Movement in Sector 4. Riltik immediately dispatched 2 drones in that direction. Sniffer, Listener, follow the drones. Gazer and I will circle around to cut off his escape. The team split up, moving away from their small camp. Joe waited until they were out of sight, then slipped into the clearing. The aliens had left some of their equipment behind, including a case of small metallic devices. Joe examined the case quickly. Inside were replacement parts for the drones and tracking devices. He took a handful of the smallest components and slipped them into his pocket. Then he disappeared back into the jungle before the aliens returned. Over the next few hours, Joe repeated this tactic. He would create a distraction, then slip in to examine or take small pieces of alien technology while they were searching elsewhere. Each time, he was careful to leave no trace of his presence. By midday, the aliens were in chaos. Their drones were malfunctioning, their tracking devices giving false readings, and their communication system working only intermittently. Someone has tampered with our equipment, Riltik shouted, throwing a broken drone to the ground. This is sabotage. Listener tilted his head. How could the human know which components to remove? Our technology is far beyond Earth's capabilities. He doesn't need to understand it, Gazer replied. He only needs to observe what we use most and take pieces of it. Joe watched this exchange from the safety of a dense thicket. The aliens were beginning to understand, but too late. They had underestimated human adaptability and observation skills. As the day progressed, Joe continued his campaign of subtle sabotage. He didn't just take equipment. He also left false trails, created misleading heat signatures with small fires, and used the jungle's wildlife to generate distractions. By late afternoon, Riltik had reached his breaking point. He stood in a clearing, surrounded by his team and their failing equipment, and looked up at the sky. Enough, he shouted. Commander Vexlor, I request permission to use the quantum scanner. Joe, hidden nearby, listened carefully. Vexlor's voice came through Riltik's communicator, sounding concerned. The quantum scanner is prohibited on developing worlds. It could harm the local ecosystem. We have no choice, Riltik insisted. 36 hours have passed, and we are no closer to capturing the human. This is our last option. There was a long pause before Vexlor responded. Very well. But use minimal power and scan only the immediate area. Joe frowned. Whatever this quantum scanner was, it sounded dangerous, not just to him, but to the jungle itself. The challenge had suddenly become more serious than a simple game of hide and seek. Joe watched from his hiding place as Riltik removed a sleek black device from a secure case. The device was about the size of a laptop but much thinner. It glowed with a purple light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Prepare the quantum scanner, Riltic ordered. Maximum range, full spectrum analysis. But Commander Vexlor said minimal power. Listener reminded him. Riltic turned sharply. Do you want to fail this mission? The human has made fools of us for almost 2 days. No more. Joe frowned. He didn't fully understand what the scanner could do, but he knew it was dangerous from the way the other aliens kept their distance from it. He needed to make a decision. Continue hiding or reveal himself to prevent harm to the jungle. As Joe considered his options, Riltic placed the scanner on the ground. The purple glow intensified, and the air around it began to shimmer. Activation in 30 seconds, Riltic announced. Clear the area. The alien team moved back, taking cover behind trees. Birds suddenly took flight from nearby branches, and insects fell silent. Even the jungle seemed to sense the danger. Joe made his choice. He wouldn't let the aliens damage this ecosystem just to find him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the emergency beacon they had given him. For a moment, he held it in his palm, looking at the small silver device. Pressing it would end the challenge, but it would also protect the jungle. Just as his thumb hovered over the beacon, Joe had another idea. He didn't need to surrender. He just needed to distract them long enough to disable the scanner. Joe put the beacon back in his pocket and pulled out his knife. He cut a long, straight branch from a nearby sapling and stripped off the leaves. Then he found a stone about the size of his fist and used vines to secure it to the end of the branch, creating a simple but effective club. Activation in 10 seconds, Riltic called out. Joe moved quickly but silently around the clearing, positioning himself directly behind Riltic. The aliens were all focused on the scanner, their backs to the jungle where Joe hid. 5 seconds. 4, 3. Joe burst from the undergrowth, moving faster than he had in the entire challenge. The aliens turned in surprise, but it was too late. Joe swung his makeshift club, striking the scanner with all his strength. The device sparked and the purple glow flickered out. No. Riltic lunged for Joe, but Joe was already moving, diving back into the dense foliage. After him. Riltic screamed. Don't let him escape. Joe ran through the jungle, hearing the aliens crashing through the vegetation behind him. He had revealed himself, but he had also stopped them from using the dangerous scanner. Now he needed to disappear again, and fast. He headed for a section of jungle where the ground dropped away into a steep ravine. Joe knew this area from his earlier explorations. There was a hidden cave behind a waterfall at the bottom of the ravine. The aliens were gaining on him. Their longer legs gave them an advantage in the open spaces. Joe could hear their breathing and the sound of their equipment jangling as they ran. When he reached the edge of the ravine, Joe paused for just a moment. He wanted the aliens to see him, to follow him to this spot. Gazer spotted him and pointed. There he is. Joe waved at them, then leaped off the edge. The aliens rushed forward, expecting to see him fall. Instead, they saw Joe grab a vine and swing across the ravine, landing safely on a ledge on the other side. Before they could figure out how to follow, Joe slipped behind the waterfall and into the hidden cave. Inside the cave, Joe moved to the back where a small air hole provided light. He could hear the aliens on the other side of the ravine, arguing about how to cross. They had lost him again. Joe checked his watch. 42 hours had passed, only 6 more to go. He had deliberately shown himself to stop the scanner, but now he was hidden once more. If he could stay concealed for just 6 more hours, humanity would pass the test. Outside, the aliens set up lights to search through the night. Riltic's voice echoed across the ravine, filled with frustration and anger. Find him. There's nowhere left for him to hide. Joe smiled in the darkness of his cave. The aliens still didn't understand. In the jungle, there were always places to hide. The final 6 hours of the challenge were the hardest. Joe remained in his cave behind the waterfall, listening as the aliens searched. They had brought in more drones and equipment from their ship, desperate to find him before time ran out. Twice, drones passed near the waterfall, their sensors scanning through the curtain of water. Joe pressed himself against the back wall of the cave, holding his breath until they moved on. His muscles ached from 2 days of constant movement and tension. He was hungry, tired, and cold from the spray of the waterfall, but he forced himself to stay alert. Outside, the jungle slowly brightened as dawn approached. Joe checked his watch. 1 hour remained in the challenge. He could hear Riltik shouting orders, his voice cracking with frustration and desperation. Search every cave, every hollow, every tree. He must be here somewhere. Joe smiled. The alien commander still didn't understand. Joe hadn't outrun the aliens' technology. He had simply connected with the jungle in a way they couldn't comprehend. Every leaf, every shadow, every sound had become part of his strategy. With 30 minutes left, Joe heard a new voice outside. Commander Vexlor had joined the search team. Enough, Riltik, Vexlor said. You have pushed your team to exhaustion. We cannot fail, Riltik insisted. The human is here, hiding like a coward. Is it cowardice to use one's natural abilities? Vexlor asked. Or is it wisdom? Joe listened carefully, intrigued by this conversation. The human revealed himself to stop the quantum scanner, Vexlor continued. He risked capture to protect this environment. That speaks of courage, not cowardice. Riltik made a dismissive sound. Sentiment. He is merely hiding again. Perhaps, Vexlor replied. But in doing so, he has taught us something valuable about humans. They adapt. They observe. They use their environment rather than trying to overcome it. As the aliens talked, Joe noticed the light in his cave changing. Water was seeping in from somewhere, slowly rising around his feet. The overnight rain had swollen the river, and the cave was beginning to flood. Joe had 2 choices: stay and risk drowning, or leave and risk capture with only 15 minutes remaining in the challenge. He decided to move. Carefully, Joe made his way to the cave entrance and peered through the waterfall. The aliens were gathered on the far side of the ravine, their attention focused on Vexlor and Riltik. If Joe was quick, he could slip out unnoticed. Taking a deep breath, Joe pushed through the waterfall and pressed himself against the rocky cliff face. The rushing water helped hide his movement as he edged along the narrow ledge. When he reached the end, he would need to climb up to escape the rising river. Joe began to climb, his fingers finding small holes in the rock. His muscles screamed with effort, but he kept moving. Above him, the jungle canopy offered safety and concealment. Just as Joe pulled himself up to a large tree root, a drone appeared overhead. Its sensors locked onto him, and an alarm sounded. There, Riltik shouted, at the top of the ravine. The alien team rushed toward him. Joe had nowhere left to run. He pulled himself onto solid ground and stood, facing his pursuers. Riltik was first to arrive, his face triumphant. Captured, with only 2 minutes remaining, Riltik declared. Joe calmly checked his watch and smiled. Actually, it's been exactly 48 hours. The challenge is over. Vexlor stepped forward, consulting his own device. He is correct. The time limit has expired. He turned to Joe and bowed slightly. Well done, Joe Barnes. You have succeeded. Riltik's expression changed from triumph to disbelief. Impossible. No one has ever evaded my team for the full duration. Until now, Joe said simply. Vexlor approached Joe, genuine respect in his eyes. You have shown us that true stealth is not about technology or natural abilities. It is about understanding and becoming one with your environment. Joe nodded. That's how humans have survived for thousands of years. We adapt. Indeed, Vexlor agreed. And because of that, Earth has passed the final test. Your species will be welcomed into the Galactic Federation. As the sun rose fully over the jungle, Joe stood with the aliens, covered in mud, exhausted but proud. A single human had proven that sometimes the oldest skills were still the best, and in doing so, had opened the door to humanity's greatest adventure.